When Jack built a fence around his property, he thought he was securing his right to privacy. But his neighbor, Linda, the HOA president, had other ideas. Accusing Jack of breaking the rules, she hit him with a $5,000 fine and claimed his fence was on HOA property. Confident in her authority, Linda didn't expect Jack to fight back. What she didn't know was that Jack had evidence that could not only expose her lies, but also turn the entire neighborhood against her. And when the truth finally came out, the fallout was nothing short of explosive. But let's start from the beginning. Jack Robinson leaned against his newly built wooden fence, taking a moment to appreciate the fruits of his labor. For weeks, he had measured, cut, and hammered every plank with care, transforming his backyard into the private sanctuary he had always envisioned. The suburban neighborhood he called home was peaceful, but this fence wasn't just about privacy. It was a symbol of his hard work, his independence, and his pride in the home he had built for himself. The morning was crisp, with golden sunlight filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across his yard. Jack let out a contented sigh, already imagining summer evenings spent in his newly enclosed oasis. But as the saying goes, peace is fleeting, and in Jack's case, it ended the moment Linda Thompson, the self-declared queen of the HOA, appeared on the scene. Her arrival was anything but subtle. Clutching her clipboard like a weapon, she marched up his driveway with the authority of a general inspecting her troops. Jack didn't need to see her face to know trouble was brewing. The sharp clicks of her heels and the stiff posture said it all. "Jack," she barked, her voice slicing through the still morning air. "What is this?" She gestured dramatically at the fence as if it were some unspeakable crime against humanity. "This eyesore is blocking my view of the sunset. You can't just build something like this without approval." Jack turned slowly, taking a moment to compose himself before responding. "Good morning to you too, Linda," he said, his tone calm but firm. "The fence is on my property. I've checked the HOA guidelines, twice, in fact, and there's nothing in them that prohibits it." Linda's eyes narrowed as she gave the fence another once-over, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, I'll be the judge of that," she said, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. "You'll be hearing from the HOA soon. Expect a fine in your mailbox by Monday." Jack felt his patience wearing thin. He had heard the stories from his neighbors about Linda's antics, arbitrary fines, endless complaints, and a relentless need to control everything in the neighborhood. But this was absurd. "Linda," Jack said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice, "I've followed every rule. The fence is compliant and it's on my property. There's no reason for this to be an issue." Linda tilted her head, her smirk deepening as if she relished the conflict. "We'll see about that," she said before turning on her heel and stomping back to her house. Jack stood there for a moment, watching her retreating figure, his mind racing. He knew Linda wasn't bluffing. This wasn't about offense. It was about control. She had made a hobby out of micromanaging the neighborhood, and now she had set her sights on him. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jack's frustration gave way to determination. He had poured his time, energy, and pride into this fence, and he wasn't about to let Linda bulldoze her way into his yard or his life. Little did he know, this was just the opening salvo in what would become a battle far more complicated than he could have imagined. The lines had been drawn, and Jack was about to discover just how far Linda was willing to go to prove her point. By Monday morning, Jack's usual routine of coffee and morning news took an unexpected detour. As he stepped out to check the mailbox, a stark white envelope with the HOA's logo glared back at him. His heart sank as he ripped it open, the words practically leaping off the page. "Violation of HOA aesthetics, $5,000 fine." Jack stared at the letter, his disbelief quickly turning into a bubbling frustration. $5,000 for a fence that was well within regulations? It wasn't just unreasonable, it was absurd. He paced his living room, the fine crumpled in his hand, replaying his conversation with Linda over and over. Her smug smirk, the way she wielded her clipboard like a weapon. It was clear this wasn't about offense. This was about control. Dropping the letter on the kitchen counter, Jack grabbed his laptop and began digging into every HOA regulation he could find. The rules were dense, full of legal jargon, but Jack was determined. If Linda wanted a fight, she was going to get one. He spent hours cross-referencing guidelines, checking local property laws, and even pulling out the original deed to his home. With each page he read, Jack's confidence grew. His fence was compliant and he wasn't about to back down, but Linda wasn't done. A week later, another envelope appeared in his mailbox. This time, it wasn't just a fine, it was a formal notice from the HOA. They were launching a reassessment of property boundaries, claiming that part of Jack's yard, including his beloved fence, was encroaching on HOA common property. Jack's hands trembled as he read the letter, his frustration boiling over. She wasn't just using regulations against him, she was fabricating claims to force him into submission. "That's absurd," Jack muttered, slamming the letter onto the counter. His mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just a power move, it was personal. Linda was willing to rewrite the rules to prove her point, and Jack wasn't about to let her win. The next day, Jack made a call to a professional surveyor. If Linda wanted to play dirty, he was ready to fight fire with fire. The surveyor arrived later that week, armed with measuring tools and years of expertise. Jack watched anxiously as the surveyor worked, meticulously marking boundaries and taking notes. When the results finally came in, they left Jack both shocked and vindicated. Not only was his fence well within his property line, but Linda's prized garden shed, it was squarely planted on his land. Jack couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. The irony was too perfect. Here she was, accusing him of overstepping boundaries, while her own shed was the real trespasser. The anger and frustration that had been weighing him down began to lift, replaced by a newfound determination. Jack wasn't just going to defend his fence, he was going to expose Linda's hypocrisy for everyone to see. As he stood by his fence that evening, the crisp air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, Jack felt a small spark of hope. This wasn't just a battle for his property, it was a battle for fairness, for standing up to bullies who hid behind titles and rules. And for the first time in weeks, Jack smiled. The tide was starting to turn, and he was ready for whatever came next. The HOA meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a place that usually buzzed with laughter and small talk during community events. Tonight, though, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the room, highlighting the faces of residents who had gathered, some out of obligation, others out of curiosity. Jack sat near the back, his folder of evidence on his lap, fingers tapping the edges as he waited for his moment. Linda presided over the meeting at the front, her clipboard resting on the table like a symbol of her self-appointed authority. She spoke with a practiced air of importance, her voice steady and full of command. But Jack wasn't listening. He was focused, replaying in his mind exactly what he would say when the time came. Finally, during the open floor session, Jack stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor drew every eye in the room. Slowly, he made his way to the front, his steps deliberate, his expression calm but resolute. He placed the folder on the table in front of Linda, its thud silencing the faint murmur of whispers in the room. "Linda," Jack began, his voice steady but loud enough to carry across the room. "Care to explain why your shed is on my property? Because I've got the documents to prove it." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Linda froze, her confident demeanor cracking for just a moment before she straightened her back and forced a smile. "This must be a misunderstanding," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "That sheet has been there for years. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." Jack didn't flinch. He opened the folder and pulled out the surveyor's report, holding it up for everyone to see. "There's no misunderstanding here. The surveyor's report is clear. My property line runs right through the middle of your shed, so either it moves or I file a trespassing complaint." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of Jack's words settling over the crowd. Linda's face flushed a deep red, and for the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. "Well," she stammered, glancing down at her clipboard as if it held the answers to her predicament. "We can discuss this further. There's no need to jump to conclusions." "Conclusions?" Jack's voice sharpened. "This isn't a conclusion, it's a fact. You've been so focused on my fence that you didn't notice your own violation, and now I'm giving you a choice. Move the shed or deal with the consequences." Linda's lips tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she abruptly adjourned the meeting, her voice clipped as she thanked everyone for attending. Jack stood his ground, watching her gather her things in silence. Over the next few days, Linda retaliated in the way Jack expected. Letters from the HOA began circulating through the neighborhood, accusing him of being a troublemaker and threatening to raise HOA fees to cover legal expenses incurred by his complaints. The wording was carefully crafted, but the intent was clear. She wanted to isolate him, to paint him as the villain. But Linda's plan didn't go as smoothly as she'd hoped. The neighborhood wasn't as unified under her rule as she liked to believe. Jack's neighbors, already wary of Linda's heavy-handed leadership, began whispering among themselves. Stories of fines, manipulated rules, and favoritism spread like wildfire. People started connecting the dots, realizing that Jack's battle with Linda was just the latest in a long line of her power plays. Jack felt the tide shifting in his favor, but he knew whispers weren't enough. If he wanted to bring Linda's hypocrisy into the light, he needed something bigger. The proof was there, but now he had to find the right stage to reveal it. This wasn't just about his fence anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced or pushed around by someone who thought they were untouchable. And Jack wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Jack sat at his desk, the soft glow of his computer screen lighting up the darkened room. The air was heavy with focus as he organized files, documents, and photographs into neatly labeled folders. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It had become a fight for justice. With every email he sent and every report he compiled, Jack's determination grew stronger. Linda had crossed the line one too many times, and now it was time to hold her accountable. The formal complaint to the city was Jack's first step. He detailed everything: the surveyor's report, photographs of his fence and Linda's shed, and even the HOA's retaliatory fines. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of an HOA president who had overstepped her authority in pursuit of control. Jack didn't stop there. He reached out to a local journalist known for exposing HOA abuses, someone with a knack for turning community disputes into headline-worthy stories. A week later, Jack's phone buzzed with an email notification. The journalist had responded, eager to dig into the story. Jack shared every detail, from Linda's baseless accusations to the undeniable proof of her own trespassing. Within days, an article appeared online with a bold headline: HOA president accused of trespassing and intimidation. The reaction was immediate. The story spread quickly, shared across social media and local forums. Residents of Jack's neighborhood and beyond chimed in, sharing similar experiences with overreaching HOAs. Comments poured in. Finally, someone is standing up to these bullies, and this is exactly why people fear joining HOAs. For the first time, Linda wasn't just facing Jack. She was facing public scrutiny. The pressure mounted as the city scheduled a hearing to address Jack's complaint. The day of the hearing arrived, and Jack walked into the municipal building with his head held high, a folder of evidence tucked under his arm. The room was stark and formal, the polished wood of the council table reflecting the tension in the air. Linda sat across from him, her usual air of confidence noticeably dimmed. The weight of the situation had finally caught up with her. When Jack was called to present his case, he spoke with clarity and precision. He laid out the surveyor's report, pointing to the exact measurements that proved his fence was entirely on his property. He showed photos of Linda's shed sitting squarely on his land and emails from the HOA, where Linda herself admitted to bending rules to suit her agenda. Each piece of evidence built a narrative that was impossible to refute. Linda's defense was weak at best. She stumbled over her words, claiming misunderstandings and miscommunications. "The shed has been there for years," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize there was an issue until now." But the evidence was clear, and the city officials weren't buying her excuses. The decision came swiftly. The city ruled that Jack's offense was fully compliant with HOA regulations and property laws. Linda's shed, however, was deemed illegal trespassing and ordered to be removed within 30 days. To make matters worse for Linda, the HOA was fined for misconduct, and she was held personally responsible for covering all legal costs, including Jack's. As the ruling was announced, a wave of relief washed over Jack. He glanced at Linda, whose face was a mixture of shock and resignation. The once untouchable HOA president had been brought down by her own arrogance and disregard for the rules she claimed to uphold. Outside the municipal building, Jack was met with handshakes and pats on the back from neighbors who had come to support him. The battle had been long and exhausting, But justice had been served. Jack's victory wasn't just his own, it was a win for every resident who had ever felt powerless against an overreaching HOA. And as he walked away from the building, the weight on his shoulders finally lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of pride and determination. The days following the city's ruling were a whirlwind of emotions for Jack and the neighborhood. News of the decision spread quickly, turning Linda's once unshakable reputation into a symbol of overreach and arrogance. By the end of the week, a formal announcement came. Linda was stepping down as HOA president. Her resignation letter was short and devoid of her usual confidence, and the neighborhood buzzed with quiet satisfaction. Jack's neighbors, emboldened by his victory, began to push for long overdue reforms. Conversations that once took place in hushed tones were now open discussions about accountability, transparency, and fairness. Jack found himself at the center of these efforts, not because he sought leadership, but because his actions had inspired others to stand up for their rights. Meanwhile, Linda's shed stood as a stark reminder of her missteps. Jack, true to his nature, gave her a full 30 days to remove it, even after the city had ruled it illegal. "It's her mess to clean up," he told a neighbor who chuckled at the irony. But Jack had plans for the wood should the deadline pass, plans that would turn a symbol of her overreach into something practical and positive. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm. The HOA, now under interim leadership, made strides toward rebuilding trust. Meetings became more inclusive, fines were reviewed for fairness, and new initiatives aimed at fostering community rather than control began to take shape. Jack watched these changes with quiet pride, knowing he had been the catalyst for them. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Jack stood by his fence, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. The view was as beautiful as he had imagined when he first built the fence, unobstructed, peaceful, entirely his. He let out a deep breath, the weight of the long battle finally lifting from his shoulders. The sunset seemed brighter, more vibrant, as if the universe itself was acknowledging his hard-won victory. The spot where Linda's shed had stood was now an empty patch of grass, a blank slate. Jack couldn't help but smirk as he walked past it, the irony not lost on him. Sometimes, karma didn't just come around, it parked itself right on your lawn. For Jack, the battle had been exhausting, but it had been worth every sleepless night, every moment of frustration. His property, his privacy, and his principles had been defended, and the neighborhood had come out stronger because of it. As he stood there, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced down arrogance and injustice and had come out the other side, not just victorious, but stronger. The fence, the fight, the community, it had all been part of something bigger. And with that thought, Jack turned toward his home, ready to embrace the quiet, well-earned life he had fought so hard to protect. Sometimes, he thought with a quiet smile, justice really did come with a view.